In 1397, in the city of Florence, a man named Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici opened a bank. It was a small operation. Just a counting house on the Via Porta Rossa with a handful of employees keeping ledgers and handling transactions for local merchants. Nothing remarkable, nothing that suggested this institution would change the world. But Giovanni made one decision that would alter the course of human history. He decided to lend money not to merchants, not to traders, not to local businesses, but to the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, the spiritual leader of all of Christian Europe. And when the Pope becomes your debtor, everything changes. Because when you control the Pope's finances, you control the Catholic Church. When you control the Church, you control the kings and emperors who need the Church's blessing. When you control the kings, you control Europe. And when you control Europe, you can build a financial system so powerful, so deeply embedded in the structure of civilization, that 600 years later, every person on earth is still living inside it. The Medici family ruled Florence for nearly 300 years, but here's what makes them different from every other ruling family in history. They never held official power. They were never kings, never emperors, never even elected officials for most of their reign. They controlled Florence and eventually much of Europe through a single mechanism that was far more powerful than armies or titles: debt. They lent money to everyone who mattered. And when you owe the Medici bank money, you do what the Medici say. Not because they threaten you with soldiers, because they threaten you with something worse: financial destruction. The Medici invented the system you're trapped in right now. Fractional reserve banking, where banks lend money they don't have. Government bonds, where national debt becomes a tradable asset. Central banking, where one institution controls the money supply for entire nations. Letters of credit, the ancestor of your credit card. Double entry bookkeeping, the accounting system that tracks every dollar you make. Tax farming, where private entities collect government revenue for a cut. Every one of these mechanisms, every one of these systems that controls your financial life today was invented or perfected by the Medici family in Florence between 1397 and 1494. And here's the most important part. The Medici Bank collapsed in 1494. The family's power faded, their empire crumbled, but the system they created didn't collapse. It spread to Venice, to Genoa, to Amsterdam, to London, to New York, to every country on earth. Today, you cannot buy a house without using Medici-designed fractional reserve banking. You cannot use a credit card without using a Medici-designed letter of credit. Your government cannot fund its deficit without issuing Medici-designed bonds. The Federal Reserve is a Medici-designed central bank. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, all of them operate on systems the Medici built 600 years ago. The family fell, but the system became immortal. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how one family in Renaissance Florence invented every financial mechanism that controls your life today. Why debt, not armies, is the ultimate form of power. How the Medici system spread from one Italian city to the entire world, and why you cannot escape it even if you wanted to, because the system is now the infrastructure of civilization itself. Let me start at the beginning, because understanding how Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici went from a small-time banker to the founder of a financial dynasty requires understanding what banking was in 1397. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church officially banned usury, charging interest on loans. The Bible said it was a sin, so Christians couldn't be moneylenders. But economies needed credit. Merchants needed loans to fund trade expeditions. Nobles needed money to maintain their estates. So Jews who weren't bound by Catholic law became the moneylenders of Europe. But there was a loophole. You couldn't charge interest on a loan, but you could charge fees for currency exchange, for transferring money between cities, for safeguarding deposits, and you could make gifts in gratitude for loans, which weren't technically interest. Italian bankers, especially in Florence and Venice, became experts at navigating these loopholes. They created elaborate systems of bills of exchange and letters of credit that functioned as loans, but weren't technically interest-bearing in the eyes of the church. This was the banking world Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici was born into in 1360. Giovanni started his career working for a distant relative who ran a bank in Rome. He learned the business. He learned how to move money across Europe using bills of exchange. He learned how to keep books using the new double entry system that was spreading through Italy. And most importantly, he learned that the real money wasn't in lending to merchants. It was in lending to the church. In 1397, Giovanni returned to Florence and opened his own bank with a simple strategy: become the Pope's banker. At the time, the Pope was based in Rome but had financial operations across Europe. The church collected tithes, taxes on Christian believers from every parish in